The world's economy was hit hard by COVID for the last 2 years, but towards the end of last year, it started to recover, at long last. Then came the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the possibility of a third world war looming large. This sent financial markets into yet another tailspin. I'm Catherine Rice, and you're listening to The Story. This week, we're talking to journalists and experts about the implications of all of this for South Africa. What does it mean for the man in the street? We're now joined by Carol Payton, Senior Financial Journalist for Fin24. Carol, thanks for being in studio with us. Our inflation rate is rising, interest rates are going up, unemployment is at a record high, yet the rand is stronger than ever. Just what is going on?
Well, a few things are going on, and they're not all, directly related. So we've got rising inflation. It's a sort of overhang from COVID. So supply chains were very disrupted during COVID. So inflation started to take off in the Western developed world, and we are kind of suffering, the same effect. And then, of course, with the war in Ukraine, you've got the oil price spiking, and so then inflation has taken a further kind of, shock, and it's going to rise even further. So that's the kind of inflation side of it. I mean, the fact that the rand remains strong is very much due to the fact that commodities prices, prices for our minerals, are so high at the moment. And that's a function of demand from countries that are using it, such as China. So it's unrelated to Ukraine and Russia, but it's had the effect of really giving a lot of support to our sort of government finances, our country finances, let's say, the finances of the country, the current account. And because we've now got lots of money, lots of dollars coming in, when we sell all of these minerals, we've actually got more dollars coming in than going out when we're exporting things. And that is what is keeping the rand strong.
Carol, the price of oil has soared, with consumers likely to feel it at the petrol pumps. Do you think this is temporary, or will we recover soon?
I think most people are looking at April and May being particularly bad months. I don't think that there'll be any time real relief. I think that the oil price has spiked, and it's less. It's kind of come down a bit since the first spikes, hit when the war broke out. So it's coming down a bit, but I don't think that we're going to see a very low oil price anytime soon because of the dynamics of the oil price and the fact that Russia plays such a large role in the oil price. So maybe April and May, the kind of prediction is going to be bad, but after that it's going to level off. But as we know, it's still people are still paying a lot of money to fill up their cars.
And Carol, judging by financial markets, it looks as though the world is hoping that the war in Ukraine is not going to end in a global conflict. How do all of these international developments affect South Africa?
Well, the war in Ukraine, I think it affect the whole world, really, with oil price and wheat price and prices for other commodities like cooking oil and so on. So we feel that effect in our inflation rate, in our food prices, in our petrol price, and so on. Normally, what happens in a crisis is that any emerging market like ourselves, the currency really gets hit in a crisis. And that hasn't happened this time. So obviously the ruble has really tumbled, but other emerging market currencies haven't really been hit, and the rand hasn't really been hit. So for us, sort of going forward, the most important thing is here we've got these high commodity prices. We don't have them all the time. What are we going to do? How do we use this moment of great fortune? Because it means, not only do we have lots of exports, the government gets in lots of revenue because the miners are making lots of money. So how do we use that and maximize it? And that's a difficult thing for South Africa. And last time there was a commodity boom, we did not get that right. So I think that's the most important thing now.
What about tourism? I mean, that's something that really has the potential to grow the South African economy. But is it likely to under the current conditions?
Well, the tourism problem, South Africa, as we know, performs below its potential, and especially in tourism. And the main reason for that are these kind of problems, our social problems, and the fact that we've got a high crime rates, safety and security is an issue. I think those are the issues that really stop people from coming here or make them think twice. As far as it being a good destination with lots of places to go and lots of good infrastructure, as well as cheap for anyone coming from the US or Europe, we're not actually making up that potential. And I do think it's got a lot to do with getting both corruption and crime under control, and then just getting our act together and promoting the country, and that hasn't really been done very well.
And given the current climate in South Africa, as you mentioned, crime, corruption, and poor economic growth, how realistic do you think Ramaphosa's goals are for international investment in South Africa?
Well, he set this goal of getting 1.2 trillion rand in investment over 5 years. Now that number is a little bit tricky because it's achievable. I mean, he's almost there, but obviously it depends what you count into the numbers and what you don't. So if a company is replenishing its factory or kind of upgrading its factory, and you count that as new investment, then the investment numbers look a lot higher than they are. But what we know is that actually what's really happening, in the numbers in the economy, when people measure these things, so people are measuring how much fixed investment is going into South Africa, and it's very, very low. In fact, it's at the lowest point it's ever been in post 94. So it's at 13% of GDP. So that's very, very low. And as long as we have those extremely low levels of investment, we're not going to have economic growth and we're not going to have job creation. And so this kind of vicious circle that we're trapped in at the moment of low growth, of rising unemployment, of an increasing number of people leaving schools and coming into the workforce with no prospects, we're not going to really get out of the trap. So something more is needed.
It's a depressing scenario because I don't know how one turns things around. We've been talking about this for so many years. Do you think there's any hope?
I do think there's hope. There's always hope. I think that one of the reasons why South Africa hasn't been able to grow its economy is because we haven't been prepared. Well, government has not been prepared to make the reforms that are needed. And we're talking about economic reforms here. Economic reforms to the investment environment. So, for instance, opening up the electricity markets. As long as people don't feel that they're going to have a secure supply of electricity, they're not going to sink billions of rands into a new factory. That's just not going to happen. So those sorts of things really have to get a lot of attention, and they have to happen a lot faster. So I think what's happening at the moment is we're starting to see those things change. And Ramaphosa is he's very determined and he's very strong on them, but he's not very fast. And so we're not getting the lift off because the things are not happening fast enough. But the hope lies in the fact that, these things do eventually start to take root and a new kind of environment for investment is created. So, I think when one gets despondent and you feel like, well, there's no hope, I mean, you do just have to look around you and look at this country and look at the wealth, the investment, the development, the infrastructure, the private sector, the strength of the private sector. All of those things, these are amazing things for an African country to have. So we've got so much potential, but the issue is realizing it.
Well, let's hope we do get there. Thank you so much for your insights and your time. That was Carol Payton, Senior Financial Journalist for Fin24. We're now joined by Dr. Iraj Abedian, Senior Economist at Pan-African Investment and Research Services. Iraj, do you think that the near-term financial outlook for the man in the street is positive or negative in the current climate?
There is no doubt that if by a man in the street you mean average middle income and lower income working class, the prospects are quite negative. Inflation is quite high, interest rates are rising, and fuel prices, very importantly, remain elevated, and the risk to all of this is on the upside. So in the medium term, by that I mean in the 18 to 24 months, we're going to have a very, very challenging environment.
What, if anything, can people do to improve their financial circumstances? And perhaps as importantly, what should they not be doing when it comes to spending their money?
Really, it's absolutely essential that they should not spend on whatever that they don't need. Whatever, of course, for different families, different individuals, the definition of need is very different. But it comes down to a very granular attention to the importance of spending only on necessities. And that means on the expenditure side managing, and on the other side, with all intention and unconscious way, avoid taking on debt, especially if it's a consumption debt. If it's debt for starting a business or setting up a source of revenue, that could be productive. But debt that is for consumption, under no circumstances is helpful in the current financial and economic framework that we have.
Iraj, with rising interest rates, what impact do you think this will have on the price of housing in South Africa? Is it likely to come down as a result of more expensive mortgages?
That is generally the case. Of course, housing is a very, very complex sector, and it's not as you know very well, it's not a very simple, uniform setup. In general, when interest rates go up, the price of property comes down. It's a negative relationship. However, there are pockets in the property sector that the demand is so high that it outweighs the negative impact of interest rates. At the same time, there are pockets that, over and above the negative aspects of interest rates rising, the environment, the suburb, the safety, the quality of the properties are such that they get a double whammy. So if you end up in a situation where you have to sell your property, be it an apartment or a house, in an environment that the suburb itself is not so-called well regarded by the buyers, then you have two problems. Interest rate makes the property prices go down, and the broader desirability of the suburb or the apartment or the block makes it so much worse. And therefore, the answer to your question is yes, generally interest rates rising or expected to rise dampens the price of property.
What are the chances of increased taxation for the ordinary South African, particularly at the upper end?
Well, it's almost inevitable. South Africa's public debt is rising, and unless and until the South African national growth, GDP growth or economic growth picks up on a sustainable basis, not on a quarter or 1 year, on a sustainable basis, ahead of 3.5% to 4%, the tax increases for the upper income individuals and households is writing on the wall.
Iraj, what, if anything, should government be doing to stimulate the economy more?
Look, the government needs to professionalize government. At the moment, we have a state which is incredibly mediocre, incompetent, and unproductive, sometimes counterproductive. So it's a very loaded question you ask. What should the government do? First and foremost, at the political level, we should have a government, not many governments. At the moment, we don't have one government. We have within the so-called national government, we have governments within governments. Then at a technical level, if you like, below the ministers and the cabinet, we have various departments. Most of them, not all of them, most of them are populated by very incompetent individuals who have a culture of mediocrity, and yet they're entrusted with a massive responsibility to turn the economy around. And many sectors, in fact, all the sectors of the economy, in one way or another, dependent on a competent state. Let me just give you one example. Our economy, by its very nature, is an export, a commodity exporter. It relies on many key imports, and yet our rail and port infrastructure is completely dilapidated. It's poorly managed. Ministers talk about it, but they do nothing about it. They contradict each other. They go year after year as if tomorrow is another day. In the meantime, the economy's growth gets more and more hammered. Our exports get less competitive. Our exporters lose, which means their jobs are at risk. And. So if you look at the sector, a key sector, fundamental sector like infrastructure, be it energy, be it ports, be it rail, be it transportation, be it urban management, these are all left in very incapable hands. At the best, the ministers and deputy ministers and DGs talk about it. Another 5 years go by, nobody does anything. For example, our government back in 2012, 10 years ago, launched the National Development Plan. One of its pillars was creating a capable state. Well, 10 years later, exactly, our government as a machinery of management of public sector, management of policies, has become less capable, not more capable. So your loaded question of what, if any, government should do, they can do a lot. They are the single largest obstacle to economic growth at the moment.
That's very worrying and depressing to think about when you speak in those terms, particularly about the National Development Plan of 10 years ago already. Thank you so much for your time. That was Dr. Iraj Abedian, Senior Economist at Pan-African Investment and Research Services. That's all we have time for this week on The Story. Join us again next week. I'm Catherine Rice, and this week's episode was recorded by Alyosha Kolstock.